Monarch Regional Advisory Committee. And just a couple housekeeping things. If you were joining our meetings last year, you're probably used to Desiree Braga leading them. She, unfortunately, but good for her, she moved to Alaska earlier this year. So in the reshuffling of her duties, I'm doing our MRAC coordination with some help from some of my other coworkers. Lauren is joining me today. Monica Matthews is joining me, and so is Deb Behringer from the BCRCD. And we hope to continue doing these meetings. If there's anything specifically that you're interested in seeing a presentation of or want to get updates from, don't hesitate to send me an email and I can work on that for you. So without further delay, I want to jump into updates, but first I want to open up the floor to everyone. Does anyone here today just want to give a quick hello to everyone and maybe share a few things about what projects we're working on before Monica jumps into her lengthy project update presentation? Yeah, Georgia.
Well, I just so I'm from the Malibu Monarch project, and one of our focuses this year is going to be about invasive plants. And I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing we do down here in the lower Santa Monica's or eastern Santa Monica's. And it's really awful. And we presented at Bill Berge's Butterfly Day at the Mermaid Tavern, which I know it's a shout for you guys, but it's every May, and it's open to whomever wants to go. And it's really quite a delightful experience. There's lots of tables and that so forth. What we found in talking about invasive plants was that despite an educated and pretty aware community, there was precious little knowledge. We took some there, and basically it was the mustard that got identified and not the 7 or 8 other invasives, common invasives that we have. So I think, and there's not really an appreciation of the increased risk of wildfire through invasives. So so we are very interested in actions that would reduce the invasive plants, and we have a couple of measures. But I think, frankly, our county ag is a problem in that regard because they require significant clearing. A quote, 300 feet is great. And that's a lot of chaparral to be cut under a false information about increasing safety in wildfire. So we think this is all a big deal, and we'd like to join with anybody that we can, any ventures on your part up there in Ventura County to reduce invasive plants and increase awareness of their problems. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could leave your contact information in the chat, that would help people follow up with you after the meeting.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any general updates or things to be aware of that they want to share? Okay. Then Monica, are you ready? Monica will be giving us a update on our Harmony project, and she'll be explaining kind of the variety of sites that we have currently working on.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm Monica Matthews. I am the conservation ecologist at the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, where Heidi also works. I get to work with Lauren and Deb as well on these projects and others that we take on, which actually, interestingly, Georgia does include wildfire mitigation. So it's possible we could have a conversation about that. But I am going to give you guys a little update on, I'm going to try not to make it too lengthy, though this is a very fun and robust and large project that I imagine many of you have heard of, if not all of you, maybe from when Des was here. So this is the Harmony Project. Harmony is a very long acronym that essentially just means native plant restoration for native pollinators and insects, native insects, and especially, of course, our monarchs. Got our cute little monarch larva right here, munching away on some, this isn't Schleppius fascicularis. This is a different species of milkweed that is a little bit more common in the Midwest, but we do also have it here, and they do munch on it throughout the United States. So I won't run through the life history of monarchs, and including the life history of our local to Ventura County monarch populations. I would be happy to send you all the link for this, but again, this probably mostly would be a refresher for all of you, not exactly news. I'm sure you're all familiar with a lot of life history. So this project includes a number of restoration sites throughout the county. You can see these numbered 1 through 14, and they cover 3 different types of project implementation and then also project planning. So there are 2 different kinds of implementation. Sites closer to the coast oftentimes are overwintering sites, and we have worked on filling in those overwintering sites, filling in gaps to provide monarchs with overwintering refugia, such as at Point Magoo right here. We have a cute little overwintering site with sycamores, and I'll show you that in a moment. But so Deb, who is on the call here, manages Carpinteria Creek, which you can see here on the left. Got some cute little goldenrods and yarrow. This is a really beautiful site that also does provide overwintering habitat. And again, another thing that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is that it is not considered advisable to plant or produce or support milkweed in an area near a known or restored overwintering habitat site. So this one is historically overwintering habitat. And so all the pollinator plants that were planted are just for food for adults. They are not for food for larvae. So that's a really important part of the project design. Arneal Park in Camarillo is a nectar and host plant site. And we can see here, we got some very active and very happy little larvae munching away on their host plant. This is a really cute site that seems to be doing really well and looks really lovely. Another site managed by Deb. This is another historically overwintering site. Again, no milkweed were planted here, just some buckwheat, and one of these photos shows a gorgeous ceanothus. And there also were overwintering plants planted to rebuild this overwintering site and restore it and enhance what is left from that historical overwintering site. Another site managed by Deb. This is a really cool kind of partnering project with the Oak Park School District, also managed by Deb. Seems to be going really well. A lot of really awesome partners have helped restore a lot of these sites. These are mostly planted with milkweed. I'll let Deb speak to that however much she feels up for it. And then this is a site that I have helped restore that I've taken on from Des. This is the site at Point Magoo State Park. This is in LA County. Most of our sites are in Ventura County. The Carpinteria Creek site that I talked about first, and this site are our only 2 sites not within Ventura County. Carpinteria Creek is in Santa Barbara County, and this one is in LA County. But this one is another historical overwintering site. Again, also filled in not just with overwintering plants like sycamores, walnut trees and bays, but also nectar plants like hummingbird sage, all kinds of cool stuff, currants, and buckwheat. It's really beautiful and really lovely, and it's been a true delight to manage that site. These were photos when the plants were babies. I'll have to update this photo. This is one of my favorite sites. I have been managing or supporting management from partners for all of the Ojai sites. You can see here, Ojai Valley has 4 sites, and Thatcher School is one of those. And you can see here that we have some native annuals that we actually seeded. Normally, we plant perennials or plant trees, of course, in the case of overwintering sites. This is the only site that I know of or that I have worked on with this project where we seeded native annuals. It's honestly a true delight to seed native annuals. It's like the ultimate instant gratification if you work in native restoration. You can see 2 species of Nemophila just going off right there. Some desert bluebells. There's also lupin and 2 species of Clarkia. It is gorgeous out there right now. And we also did plant perennials. You can see here, I know you can't see it very well, but you can see it a little bit better there. This is actually seated in a solar panel array. And along each end of the solar panel array, we planted perennials. But we wanted to add in more color, so we also seeded the site. This is another one of our Ojai sites. This site we planted with the help of, you can see high school students here with Besant Hill School and a little baby penstemon. We are currently watering these guys to help them to establish, and then I'll have some more exciting flowering photos to share with you all. This is a site that I help manage, though our partner, who is Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, they are the owner and the steward of this site, and so they are in charge of doing the plantings. Their native plant botanist propagated each one of these and put them in the ground, and you can see that they are still babies. So I'll have to go out again, hopefully in the near future, and see them more established and flowering, but that's a really exciting site. And they'll also be adding on more, but they just haven't gotten a chance to work on that yet. This is a site that we actually have 3 little subplots, little gardens incorporated into this. And this is a gentleman who works for the California Conservation Corps who helped us install these plants, another few members of the CCC. And that's been a really incredible partnership with Girl Scouts and with the CCC. We've put in 3 gardens so far and still working on irrigation, but it's moving along nicely. These are some sites that are historical overwintering sites, and they are in implementation stages. Planning stages. Other sites are implementation stages. And so these have habitat management plans that Althouse and Mead are helping us, are producing and producing for us. And that's going along really nicely. And last but not least, 2 more sites managed by Deb. This is a site that Deb is in charge of alongside our county partner. And as you can see, the site is looking pretty fabulous, looks really cute. And from what I can tell, I shouldn't speak for you, Deb, but it seems to be a pretty excellent partnership. And last but not least, we have Sterling Hills Golf Course, which, as you can see in this photo, was fairly recently being installed, and really exciting site. There's also a raptor perch actually kind of placed right here that was put in after the planting day. And from what I have heard, the site looks really, really excellent. So that's kind of the update that I can give you all. I'm excited to see if you have any thoughts or questions. And I believe Deb is also here. I know she's here, and I believe she's here to help answer questions for sites that she is managing. I
I have
hope.
a question, Monica.
Yeah. That was a bit of a whirlwind tour.
Yeah, are you seeing a lot of Monarch activity so far this year?
Let me stop sharing.
Or does it vary by site? Are you noticing like a variation by site?
Yeah. So I have seen monarchs laying eggs on some of our milkweed plants at Camp Arness, the Girl Scouts camp. I looked for the eggs. right after I saw them laying the eggs, and I couldn't find the eggs. So I don't know if that was a swing and a miss for the monarchs. I also will say I have been hearing, and I would be curious to hear what others in this group have heard or have seen, that we're having a funny year for monarch larval emergence. I think I was hearing in like early March that someone had like, I don't know, decent size larva on their milkweed, which is very early. That aside, I haven't seen any larvae on any of our plants. That's a good question. We will be transitioning, and Deb's already been doing this. So, you know, I just mean for my sites that were only planted maybe a month ago or so, we will be transitioning to monitoring. But of course, I'm a bug nerd and I look for the larvae and the eggs as much as I can. I was at the native plant tour for Ojai Valley, not at all related to this. And I was like looking through their milkweed. Yeah, we're keeping our eye out and we'll see what we find.
Oh, Chris, you have a question?
Oop. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'm at Sterling Hills Golf Course. I'm the landscape consultant for the golf course, and I planted one of the first habitats for monarch butterflies before this grant that was kind of adjacent to the area. I have stands of native milkweed already planted that were starting to come up in March, and I saw a lot of egg laying and a lot of larvae early on in March. What I'm finding out, and you guys may just want to keep an eye on it, is a lot of predation from lizards, where they get to the first or second, third instar, and then they're just kind of gone, which is unfortunate. So, but we're still seeing a lot of activity, and then the new stuff on the Harmony grant that we planted is just starting to sprout. And we planted some more mature plants like that were 2 and 3 seasons old, as opposed to a plug for native milkweed for narrowleaf. So it's just something to keep an eye out on the lizards.
And the birds, for sure, all of them. Every time I look too closely at a larva that I don't need to be looking at for work, I'm kind of like, oh, don't look too closely. The scrub jays will find them. But yeah, that's a good thought. Happy to take any other questions, but I don't want to hold up the agenda, Heidi.
Yeah. Last call out for questions for Monica. All right. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you guys.
That was a lot for you to run through. So
I put it on my docket. It's okay. It's my fault.
Next we have Monarch Joint Venture. They're going to be sharing some takeaways from the 2023 research review. And I think we have Sarah Gomez and Alex Carroll. Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having us today. It's nice to see you all.
Yeah, no, thank you I felt so lucky when you confirmed that you could do it. I was like, yay.
Yeah, I love connecting with everyone. So this is really fun for me too. I'm going to pull up my screen here. Let's see if I can actually see. Can everyone see my screen?
I can see it. Looks good.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, I do see some familiar faces, which is fun. So for those of you who don't know who we are, we work with Monarch Joint Venture, and we're a national nonprofit organization that works to conserve the monarch butterfly through science, habitat, education, and partnership. So each year we put together this research review that summarizes all of the findings from the year's prior's peer-reviewed research papers. So we pulled out just a few Western-related highlights from the 2023 review, and that's what we'll be sharing today. So my name is Sarah Gomes, and I'm the Western Science Coordinator for MJV. I'm based in the Bay Area, so I support our research and monitoring efforts here on the West Coast.
And I'm Alex Carroll. I'm MJV's Eastern Science Coordinator. I'm based in Minnesota, so I'm not as familiar with all the cool California stuff that's going on.
She is, though. She put together most of this presentation. Nice job.
I'm learning.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. So as Sarah mentioned, the Monarch Joint Venture organizes this review annually. And in 2023, we reviewed 82 papers on monarchs and milkweed, which was a lot. But this presentation will just focus on 11 of those papers, which looked at monarchs or habitat in the West. And we'd just like to point out that our summarization of the research is not intended to evaluate the integrity of the science or endorse the findings. We're just giving a little summary of them. And on this slide, we've got the table of contents from the research review, and the bolded sections are where the papers we're talking about fit into that. So we've got a good range of topics.
Great. So diving right in here, we're going to start kind of big picture and narrow things down. So starting off with this paper called Complexity, Humility, and Action, a Current Perspective on Monarchs in Western North America. So in this paper, Yang summarizes some of the challenges that Western monarchs face. As you know, those are kind of complicated. They're dynamic, and a lot of these challenges interact with one another. They vary in both time and space. And so Yang kind of highlights the value of these localized efforts. And in this paper, Yang offers 3 guidelines for monarch conservation in the West. The first is to support basic and applied research to better understand the complexity of this system. The second is to minimize risk through the precautionary principle. And the third is to continue to protect important resources in the places and times with the greatest impact.
Still focused on the big picture, this paper by Diffendorfer et al. Examined the advantages and obstacles encountered in big team science collaborations, and they focused on the Tri-National Monarch Conservation Science Partnership, the Tri-MCSP, which is a collaboration that spans Canada, Mexico, and United States. And they mentioned that the Western monarch population really got incorporated into this in 2016 with the formation of the Western Monarch Conservation Science Team. And that group identified science priorities for the Western monarchs and developed some products which were later incorporated into conservation models, such as the one in this photo. They also highlighted the 5 common challenges for collaborative science teams and some of the lessons that could be learned from this trinational partnership. One of the ones they highlighted was funding. It's always hard to secure, but they pointed out that large teams can raise awareness of an issue and often create new funding streams. And as an example of this, they mentioned that for the Eastern monarch population, there was a population threat assessment that was done. And after this, the Department of Defense then funded a new threat assessment for the Western monarch population, which was a funding stream that hadn't been available previously, but this raising awareness of the plight of monarchs kind of brought a new opportunity there.
Great. So this next paper focused on state wildlife action plans, or SWAPs. And in this paper, they searched each plan for text related to monarchs and or milkweed. So I should add that they searched all 51 states, but we just kind of highlighted what was going on in the West. But this paper does encompass the entire US. So most states did mention monarchs or milkweed in some form in these plans, though that varied by state. And overall, they recommended that every contiguous state should have the monarch listed as a species of greatest conservation need, or SGCN, but that was only listed in some states. Another thing to note about this paper is that you see some are highlighted in gray with no listing. Some states haven't necessarily mentioned it in the plan, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not doing anything for monarchs. It's just not explicitly stated in that plan.
This next paper was by Kessler and Bunch, and they investigated habitat suitability and compared that with actual monarch sightings from the community science program Journey North. So they developed their own habitat suitability model and then looked by month at where the suitable habitat was located and where monarchs had been seen. And one thing that they pointed out is that there seemed to be a mismatch between where the best habitat was and where the monarchs were actually migrating. For example, in the fall, they mentioned that the monarchs were back at the overwintering sites in August and September, even though there was still suitable habitat throughout the breeding range. And they also pointed out a pocket of monarchs in Arizona, and they weren't sure whether this was potentially a new overwintering site or whether these were monarchs that were traveling to or from Mexico and joining the eastern population, or if this is potentially a new non-migratory population, which could be a sink for Western monarchs. But overall, they highlighted that there needs to be more data. There's still a lot that's unknown about where the monarchs are going, which leads us to the next paper.
Awesome. So on the same trend of community science, this paper focused on the community science program, which is called the Western Monarch Mystery Challenge. Some of you might be familiar with. And so this ran for 3 years between the days of February 14th to April 22nd. And the goal here was to really better understand where monarchs are going in the spring and how they're breeding. So we know that monarch populations are lowest in the spring, but it's also one of the most critical time periods in that whole cycle. So these observations documented this gradual process of population expansion across the West. And they found that monarchs started breeding right away as they left those overwintering sites. And it gradually expanded east. And by the end of this period, by April 22nd, some of those monarchs were already in the Sierras and a little bit beyond as well. But of course, they highlight the need for more data, as Alex said. So continued monitoring is needed to better understand how those habitats differ between ecoregions and how monarchs use those habitats throughout the season.
This next paper by Diltz et al. Focused on California's Central Valley, and their goal was to build a tool that could model habitat connectivity within this intensive agricultural landscape. And they pointed out that California's Central Valley is an area of great human population growth and valuable agricultural land, but it's also a biodiversity hotspot within the California floristic province. And so they really wanted to identify the best places to restore pollinator habitat. And they did this by looking at the crop types and the toxicity of the pesticides used within those. For example, they said citrus was really high intensive with pesticides versus rice, and they figured out, or they assumed that insects would have a harder time traveling over crop fields where a lot of pesticides were applied. And so they built these models to figure out the least cost paths or the easiest routes for pollinators to travel across the landscape. And the one land type that they identified as a great opportunity looking forward were agricultural margins. And they found that in some areas, the total land area of agricultural margins was actually greater than the natural areas. And so they determined that if these agricultural margins could be restored so that there wasn't pesticide use there and no crops in those areas, then that could potentially increase habitat connectivity 2 to 3 times within the Central Valley.
Great, so moving down south a bit. This study by Wade et al. Looked at genetic diversity of the rare Mojave milkweed at a solar site in the Mojave Desert. So globally, deserts are the #2 land cover for new solar projects. And the Mojave Desert is pretty ecologically intact, and it's a hotspot for a lot of endemic species. One of those is Mojave milkweed. And while it's common in other states, here in California, it's considered seriously threatened, and it's restricted down to the Mojave Desert. So at this site, they found some genetically unique population contained within this solar area. And they found that milkweed persisted in these little halos of undisturbed habitat, or microrefugia, But they also pointed out that having this small contained population in the long term has lower success. So you have a loss of genetic diversity, lower adaptive capabilities in the long term. And so they highlighted how some of these desert developments might negatively impact the genetic diversity of those small populations. And then they highlight the need for multi-year species monitoring, particularly before construction, so that we better understand population structure and the genetic composition of rare plants within these desert solar sites.
All right, still focusing on sort of desert and water stress, Dythelm et al. Looked at the effects of water stress on monarch preference for milkweed. They pointed out that water stress increases the concentration of some plant chemicals, such as primary and secondary metabolites, which includes cardenolides, in milkweed plants, and monarchs then use those compounds to locate milkweed. And so they hypothesized that water-stressed plants would be more attractive to monarchs and that they would lay more eggs on those plants. And so they took Western female monarchs and gave them the option of either a well-watered milkweed plant. This was with narrow leaf milkweed. So the option between a well-watered or a reduced water plant. And they found that the monarchs laid 40% more eggs on the low water plants, which was what they had hypothesized. However, they were surprised to find that there was no chemical concentration difference between the two treatments. So there was no difference in those metabolites between the well-watered versus the reduced water plants. And so they were wondering, you know, what made the monarchs choose those water-stressed plants? Because clearly they had a preference for those. And they suspect that perhaps it could be carbon or nitrogen levels or the leaf surface or some other factor other than the chemicals contained within the plants that were driving preference in this study.
Awesome. So now we're going to shift a little bit to talk about winter breeding. So this study was by Steele et al. And in this paper, they reviewed winter breeding in monarchs in both the eastern and western US. So they looked at sites in the US and in Sonora, Mexico. So winter breeding occurs where there are warm temperatures and or year-round milkweed. And this figure on the left sums it up really nicely. So as many of you know, monarchs typically go into diapause during the winter, so they kind of slow down their processes and hunker down to withstand the winter. And that times up with the senescence of most of our native milkweed plants. So when there are non-native milkweed plants present, those plants don't necessarily senesce during the winter, and so that triggers this continued reproduction. And so that comes with a suite of other issues like longer larval development, higher predation, increased parasites, among other things. And so what they found is that monarchs did reproduce in the winter on some native milkweed species that hadn't quite yet senesced. But most of those observations occurred on non-native milkweeds such as tropical or family jewels. And so ultimately, they predict that winter breeding could have a negative impact on monarch population numbers, but of course recognize that there's more that needs to be studied still.
So that paper focused on the dangers of winter breeding, and this paper by Kenzel et al. Focused on the benefits of migration to monarchs. And while the western monarch population doesn't have to fly quite as far as the eastern monarchs, there's still evidence that migration benefits the population. It's been found that overwintering monarchs on the west coast have lower parasite loads than breeding monarchs. And this paper is focused specifically on the protozoan parasite Ophriocistus electroscira, commonly known as OE. And the mechanism for this reduced parasite loads in the overwintering areas was hypothesized to be migratory culling. And this is a process where Heavily infected monarchs have smaller, weaker wings and are generally not as good at flying as monarchs that aren't infected or have lower infection rates. And so these heavily infected monarchs often die before they reach the overwintering grounds. And this may be one of the reasons why there's less infection in the overwintering grounds and one of the benefits to migration. However, this paper also identified some areas where future research is needed, such as the physiological and cognitive changes that parasites may cause on the monarchs, and also variations in virulence. They pointed out that the California OE strains are actually more virulent than in the eastern population. And so they're not sure how that might affect monarch migration or the benefits of migration.
All right, moving to our last paper. This study was a 3-year case study by the Xerces Society, Great Valley Seed, and the California Bureau of Land Management. And the goal here was to increase commercial seed supply for early season milkweed and late season nectar plants from the San Joaquin Valley. They focused on a whole set of plants, but in terms of milkweed, they ended up focusing on California milkweed, woolly pod milkweed, and desert milkweed. So they collected seed from wild populations, they germinated those seeds, planted them up in production plots, and then reharvested them. And what they found is that cold stratification techniques increase germination of those milkweed species. So while they're not quite at commercial levels yet, they're going to keep propagating and get there eventually. And so this would significantly increase the public availability of those early season milkweed species. Awesome. So here is a list of the papers that we summarized in this presentation, but shortly I'm going to drop a link to the research review itself, and that has all of the information, the summaries, and where to access those papers as well. So if you have any questions, we could probably take some today if there's time, but please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I've left my email here and I can drop it in the chat. And then we also have a whole lot of information on our website, monarchjointventure.org.
I have a quick question, Sarah. Do you guys, how long have you been doing this kind of like yearly review?
That is a good question. One moment. Since 2020, so about
Okay.
4 years.
Very cool.
And I'm dropping this link in the chat in case you'd like to see those.
Yeah, I think I found out about it last year. I was trying to figure something out when I was teaching kids about monarch butterflies, and your documents were so helpful to me.
Awesome,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Yeah, I learned about it last year too, and it was so helpful for me getting on board just to have that kind of resource.
Yeah. Georgia, you raised your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to report on a related, but not regarding the papers, subject, which is historically the Chumash here, which is our local tribe, one of our local tribes in the Santa Monica's, have used milkweed not only in weaving for regalia, but also in nets that I think they use to capture rabbits. So that was historically, you know, kind of well before the colonization occurred. And these are areas that are quite close to, if not part of, overwintering sites, which I'm sure existed much more plentifully before we came in and had so much development.
That's really neat. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for that. I'm definitely going to read through yours, your
Great.
research review.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us. And of course, feel free to reach out anytime.
Next, we have Marilyn Whitford with the VC Master Gardeners, and she's going to be talking about a recent project they were involved with.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Marilyn Whitford, and I guess you can say I'm a newly minted Ventura County Master Gardener. So I graduated in 2022. And I want to thank you for letting me have some time on today's agenda. Let's see. So Master Gardeners are trained volunteers who assist the Cooperative Extension agricultural advisors by sharing information with the public on home gardening, pest management, and sustainable landscaping. And whenever we speak to the public, we're asked to call attention to insect threats to our agricultural crops, whether they're commercial or in your home garden. And we currently have two big threats, the Asian citrus psyllid and the Queensland fruit fly. So if you're interested in more information, you can visit the websites listed here, or you can go to the Master Garden website. There are actually a couple of quarantine areas in Thousand Oaks regarding the fruit fly. Okay. So, but today I'm here to talk about the work that the Master Gardeners have done at one of our demonstration gardens at the Veterans Home of California in Ventura, affectionately known as CalVet. And we've been working on Monarch and pollinator demonstration gardens since early 2022. And I wanted to mention to begin with that we were in contact with Andy Spurka, who was Desiree's predecessor, who got us started on our project. We had a field trip out to Port Hueneme to the Masonic Cemetery out there where there's an overwintering spot. And he also gave us information about the Xerces Society Habitat Kit Program and the Western Monarchs Genomics Project that we've been involved with. So the Veterans Home of California, the one in Ventura, is one of 19 homes in the state for disabled and senior veterans. It's located at the Wells and Telephone Road in Ventura, which is not too far from your Saticoy site that you've been working on. The location is the site of the early Chumash village of Saticoy. And during the Spanish and Mexican periods, it became part of one of the land grant ranchos. And then in the early 1900s, it was became a farm. But in the early 2000s, the state of California purchased the property and built an assisted living facility, completed in 2009 and opened in 2010. So as you can see from the pictures here, the front entrance has professional landscape. But behind the home, it's a completely different picture. There are individuals for those residents who would like to garden in their own spots, as well as a collaboration with the Master Gardeners to have a demonstration gardens. So the plans and work for the Master Gardeners began before the residents moved in. So it's a cooperative venture between the Veterans Home and Ventura County Master Gardeners. So this is a view of the Master Gardener garden from the roof of the facility. And you can see the focal point of the Master Gardener garden is a memorial rose garden that's laid out in the shape of the heart. And so in this view, you can see that the rose garden is surrounded by a pollinator habitat area around here. There's a succulent garden to the right, more roses by the bocce ball court. And we also have various fruit trees and an orchard. And this is a little more extensive map that was drawn by the daughter of one of the master gardeners. And it shows you a little bit more of the property. And it's obviously not to scale, but it shows you some of the residents' little areas. There's one resident who has banana trees here. There's a resident who has a garden here. There are extensive raised beds and a greenhouse that one resident takes care of. The staff has a garden, and another one of the residents has a grape arbor over here. And in addition to the areas that you saw in the picture, we have what we call the back 40, which is planted extensively with native trees and shrubs. It also includes a Shumash healing circle and what we call a welcome home garden as well. So in the winter and spring of 22, I worked with 3 other trainees to help design and install a Monarch way station and pollinator garden as a hands-on project. And there was already narrow leaf milkweed, California fuchsia, and on the property, as well as some other California natives and Mediterranean plants. So what we did was focus on adding layers of shrubs and trees to provide forage, nectar, seeds, and shelter for the butterflies. And we had one section designated for Mediterranean plants and another area focused on native plants, including the Western redbud, manzanita, and coffeeberry. And here you can see we're planting the Western redbud, and you can see the rose garden behind. So this is another view from the roof. And so this is the area, this area right here on the left is what we worked on for a hands-on project. And this is our Mediterranean area near this weeping bottlebrush. And then over here, we have a Xerces pollinator plant sign and the redbud, and we have other coastal sage scrub and chaparral plants here. And eventually we plan to extend the pollinator area all around this garden and in this lounge area as well. So I'd like you to focus your attention on this area right in the corner. And after 2 years of winter rains, even though we had removed some plants that were overgrown, but the winter rains killed a lot of the drought-tolerant plants that had been planted in this area. And we also learned from a local Shumash historian that this area, which is close to the Santa Clara River, originally had springs and vernal pools. And so much like what happened with Lake Tulare, we had our own vernal pool revive in that area. So this year, with this year's trainees, we had 2 hands-on projects. And what we had one of the groups do was revitalize this corner that got drowned. And we realized that we weren't going to be able to fight with Mother Nature, that we are going to have periods of flood. So what the group did was recreate the dry creek and planted native plants that are drought tolerant, but also can tolerate occasional flooding in standing water. So some of our selections included California tule, annual tule, scarlet monkey flower, blue-eyed grass, and clustered field sedge. And you can see from this picture that we're still in the early stages. We've just planted, and we also have critters at this garden. So we've had to improvise some critter cages to keep them from munching on the annual tule. Evidently, the rabbits really like that plant. So the other project was restoring the Shumash healing circle. And so another group of trainees defined pathways, restored the healing circle, and added plants that are important to Chumash traditions, including the white sage. This white sage that you see here was already there, but they planted additional white sage, California fuchsia, and some other plants. And I'd like to mention that in this area, we have narrowleaf milkweed. We've just planted California milkweed, and we have woolly milkweed that is a volunteer that I'm assuming is a native to the area, because we often find plants that are indigenous to the Santa Clara River Valley at this point. Okay. So in addition to the plants we installed in these projects, we've received monarch and pollinator habitat kits from the Xerces Society for 2022 and 2023. Each of these kits includes about 30 California native plants that we've planted in our pollinator garden areas and in the Chumash garden, including black sage, California buckwheat, foothill penstemon, Pacific aster, and purple needlegrass. We have 2 pollinator habitat sites posted at 2 entry points of the garden. And we've just learned that we've been granted a 3rd habitat kit for the fall of 2024. And these plants will be planted in the understory of the native trees and shrubs in the back 40 of the garden. Okay. So we've done some educational activities and outreach involving monarchs and pollinators. We've posted signs around the garden describing the appearance of monarchs and lookalikes, the monarch life cycle and migration patterns. And in 2023, we offered a class to the public, attracting pollinators with California native plants, which was attended by 22 Ventura County residents. And we partnered with the Santa Monica Mountains Fund to offer milkweed plants to our participants. And then later in the year, Antonio Sanchez, whom many of you know, taught 2 public workshops on native plant care and maintenance at our garden. We have a lot of plants that he enjoyed showing how to prune, and also gave a demonstration on the best ways to plant native plants. Okay, finally, I had the opportunity to become a community science volunteer for the Western Monarch Genomics Project. And this is a research study supported by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So with a scientific collecting permit under the researcher, I am allowed to collect specimens of deceased monarch butterfly larvae, adults, and pupal casings at the Calvet Gardens. I store them in my home freezer, and in the fall, I ship them to a research lab at Colorado State University for processing and further study. So the other volunteers at the garden act as scouts, letting me know when there's a sample that needs to be collected. So there are a number of questions that this study aims to answer. One is, how are migratory monarchs that overwinter on the coast related to the non-migratory Western monarchs that breed year-round in the LA basin on tropical milkweed? They want to learn how many distinct population structures there are and how they're distributed in the North American breeding range. And do individuals from the same breeding population migrate to the same overwintering sites each year? Additionally, to what degree do they mix with other breeding populations? For example, the butterflies that overwinter in Port Hueneme and Ventura, do they mix with the ones that overwinter at Elwood Beach or at Pacific Grove? So the Calvet site is considered a breeding site. Um, and last year I collected 23 samples, and so far I've already collected 5 samples this year. And the collection is scheduled to wrap up at the end of September. And I'm eagerly awaiting the study results, and perhaps this will be part of Monarch Joint Venture's report for next year or the year after that. So not only are Calvet Master Gardener volunteers doing our part to protect and promote habitat for monarch butterflies and other pollinators, we are also contributing to the well-being of the residents and staff at the Veterans Home. Watching the butterflies enhances their connection with nature and brings them joy. It's heartwarming to hear them express their delight as they watch the butterflies flutter across the garden. With our public outreach in classes, we hope to demonstrate that how Ventura County residents can create microhabitats in their own homes and at their workplaces. Any of us, even with small yards, decks or balconies, can offer some part of the habitat that bugs need to flourish. So I'd like to thank you for letting me share our activities with you. And I'd like to mention that the pictures that you see on this slide here are in February of this year. We did have a few monarch caterpillars in January, February, even though we'd cut our narrowleaf milkweed back. And these 2 chrysalises that you see are on the western redbud that we planted. You can see it's dormant at the time. And we actually got to watch this butterfly emerge right before our eyes. So, that was in February. And the year before, we had a butterfly that emerged in December. But since then, we've made an effort to cut back our narrowleaf milkweed. So we we're trying to avoid them breeding at the wrong time. Let's see, I had another thought. I lost it. You were asking about, we have seen fewer monarchs this year. Outside of these monarchs, we've seen fewer larvae and butterflies. We are seeing them, we're seeing them mate, but we haven't seen many new chrysalises since then, maybe 5 or 10. But we've also had a long, cold winter, so I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
So here are some resources and my contact information. I can also put that in the chat. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm like blown away by all the work that you're a part of. That is so awesome. A lot of like, you know, like compliments going to you in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, people just glad to see like the kind of work that you're doing. I personally want to connect with you probably after this presentation again, because I am doing a lot of the outreach for our Harmony project. And one of those is our pollinator alert program, like just to get people who are interested in doing what they can do to help monarchs and other pollinators, like sending out like kind of seasonal type email blasts. And I think that maybe we can amplify our causes together.
Sure.
So that would be great.
Yeah.
And then Georgia, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the great presentations. They're very interesting and very wonderful that you're doing all these restorative projects. So thank you. I have 3 questions. 2 of them don't have a direct relationship, but an impact on native gardens. One is, where can I get A. californica? I would love to get some more. If anybody knows, I'm in Malibu, so that's the location, but lots of times these things can be shipped. So I would like some plants, and I know the other members of our group would as well. And just, yeah, so that's one question. The other question is, I saw some mulch on the gardens. I'm wondering how thick the mulch is, if you could tell me, and the type of mulch that you're using. I could ask Antonio that, it's true, but if you have an answer, that would be helpful. There seems to be an overabundance of mulch here that's used in the city. And, you know, I have concerns about the effect of that, but I'd like to see what you folks are using. Also, especially given the a tree disaster with the pesticides, are any folks up there interested in a city or a county being pesticide free, poison free? Those are my 3 questions. Thanks.
Oh, okay, I'll take a stab at answering the questions that I can. So, A. californica, we received some plants in our Xerces habitat kits, and those are propagated at a nursery in San Jose. So I'm not sure, and I don't know of anyone who is propagating that here. And ours, unfortunately, didn't survive the winter. So we were looking forward to getting some more in our habitat kit for next year. The second about the mulch, we have received wood chip mulch, and we've received free mulch from the Edison company. And I don't think it's any, we've just spread a lot of mulch recently, so there's about 2 to 3 inches of mulch. I don't think any more than that in any area. But we've made sure that we have some open, and there are plenty of open areas that you didn't see in the pictures that are bare dirt on the property. And your last question, I don't think in the master gardener, we do not use any pesticides at all, but we don't have control over what the veterans home does on their professional landscaping. But whatever they do would be in the front, the front landscaping.
I see. And just thank you. And just as an aside, I wondered if, you know, I think Antonio was working at the Santa Ana Botanical Garden years ago. Yeah, doing their seed stuff, and I don't know what else. And they actually had a terrific program called Grow Native at the West Side VA down here. It was great, and the people who staffed it were great. So, you know.
Sounds great, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So does it, I know Antonio's working for the Santa Monica Mountains Fund Nursery. Have you asked him about the Scotias californica?
I haven't, but I think he mostly grows the narrow
leaf, yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to mention.
Oh no, wait. I could be wrong on that, but I don't know if he's giving them out, because I connected him with Tom Landis. Does any of you know him?
No.
From Oregon. He was a forester, and now he does all kinds of stuff for the monarch butterflies. Yeah, so he's a scientist, and he was given a grant with somebody, oh gosh, I think he said someone in Colorado, where they had a license to collect the seeds from californica. And so the last I knew, well, I put him in touch with Antonio, and I think Antonio was growing some of the plants from seeds he'd collected, but that was a couple years ago, so I'm not really updated.
I also wanted to mention that the Ventura County Master Gardeners has 9 demonstration gardens across the county, and we have pollinator gardens at 3 or 4 of them. We also have a collaboration with Antonio at Santa Monica Mountains Fund for master gardeners to volunteer with him and learn how to propagate native plants. And our new Hanson Agricultural Research and Education Center, which is in Camarillo, is in the process of developing a pollinator garden that I believe will be used for research. So there will be, the master gardeners will be actively involved in pollinator conservation.
That sounds fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any comments or anything they want to address? Okay. Well, thank you guys all for joining us. We have recorded the meeting and we will share that at a later point. We'll have to upload it to our YouTube channel, most likely. And our next meeting will be sometime in the fall, so keep an eye out for our email blast about that. But hopefully we'll get an agenda out for you guys. And if you guys have any suggestions of presenters that you would like to hear more from, please email me and let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.